There are multiple ETFs that earn investors way more than a standard 10% on average from S&P 500. I studied the best ETFs for my own portfolio for a long time, and in this video I'm going to share how you can make 14 to 15% annually and make up to 30% more from your investments just by picking the right investment tools. I will share insights from seasoned investors and show how you can replicate their success. I'm also going to reveal one massive mistake most investors make that absolutely kills their success. Keep watching until the end, because in this video I will go over 7 ETFs that consistently beat in the returns of S&P 500 index. As S&P 500 is considered benchmark for investing, where you can expect about 10% yearly return. But if you are able to get 12% or even 14% instead of this base benchmark of 10%, it could be absolutely massive. I will give you a quick example. If you invest $1,000 per month for 15 years and receive 10% yearly returns, you can expect to have $385,447. And if you invest the same amount for 15 years and receive 14% returns, you can expect $533,246. It adds up to be almost $200,000 difference. When I find an ETF which is beating S&P 500 index, I'm not trying to knock the S&P 500 out instantly, but instead I just try to research which of these ETFs that will possibly beat the S&P 500 in the future I could add to my own portfolio. S&P 500 has been so reliable over the years that I still think even with a decent amount of overlapping between S&P 500 and other ETFs in this video, it is still worth it to keep both options in your portfolio. So, number 1 is one of the most hyped ones during this day and age, since it is tracking technology sector, and technology obviously gone wild lately. It is considered growth ETF, which basically means it focuses on fast-growing and expanding companies and is more volatile, but that is because by investing in this ETF you expect above average returns as well. We are talking about VGT ETF, Vanguard Information Technology ETF. Over the past 10 years it had yearly appreciation of almost 20%. This year it is already up by 49%. VGT invests in solid companies like Apple, Microsoft, Nvidia, Broadcom, Adobe, and more. It is also heavily invested in technology software and services, technology hardware and equipment, semiconductor equipment manufacturers. VGT seeks to track investment performance of the MSCI US Investable Market Information Technology 2550 Index, an index of large, medium-sized, and small US companies in the information technology sector. One interesting fact about this ETF that it does not hold some big names that you might think is almost a must in this sector like Google, Amazon, and Meta. That is because this ETF holds companies designated information technology, and these three are not classified as such. So, one of the cons of this ETF, if you plan to hold on this ETF as your only technology ETF, since you are going to miss on some big names for sure. Another con of VGT is of course that it is basically a specialty sector, which means if information technology decides to plummet, you will definitely see this ETF go down. This makes it a little bit more risky. Of course, with bigger risk comes bigger returns. Expense ratio of VGT is 0.10%, which is quite low, and it invests in total of 315 stocks. So, this ETF is definitely a very viable option for those who are a little bit younger and can tolerate price fluctuations, and for the long run wants to see bigger than average returns. So, the next ETF is also in technology space, but does not get nearly as much hype as VGT. It is also better in the pure technology sector in my opinion. We are talking about XLK ETF here. XLK is the Technology Select Sector SPDR fund. This fund currently is on fire, since it is beating the VGT over the past year and its value currently up by 52%. The Technology Select Sector Index seeks to provide an effective representation of the technology sector of the S&P 500 index. The index includes companies from the following industries: technology hardware, storage and peripherals, software, communications, equipment, semiconductors and semiconductor equipment, IT services, electronic equipment, instruments and components. It has an expense ratio of 0.10% and has 64 holdings in this ETF, so it is way less than VGT. 10-year yearly appreciation is close to 20% as well. Now I will give you a quick real-life example. If we take back example from before, where we invested $1,000 per month for 15 years in S&P 500 with 10% yearly returns, we would have $345,000 in your account. Now, if we invested the same amount in the ETF like XLK, after 15 years investor could expect almost $900,000. Top holdings in XLK are Microsoft, Apple, Broadcom, Nvidia, Adobe, Cisco, Intel, and more. This ETF has shown some decent consistency, so definitely add this to your research list and possibly add this to your portfolio. Next one we are going to talk about is another technology ETF. We will cover some other sectors ETFs soon, but lately technologies are going crazy, so I have to add few of them. FTEC is Fidelity MSCI Information Technology Index ETF, and it has been up almost 50% for the last year. FTEC follows the MSCI USA IMI Information Technology 2550 Index. This is different from an S&P 500, which invests only in large cap companies. FTEC invests in mid-size and small-size companies, so it is a pretty good option for those investors who are looking to diversify. Over 10 years, it consistently appreciated almost 20% every year. Holdings are very similar to other ones, with top holdings being Apple, Microsoft, Nvidia, Broadcom, Adobe, Cisco, and others. This fund holds 315 companies and has a little bit cheaper expense ratio of 0.084%. If you found any value so far, please like and subscribe. Next fund is one of my favorite, and in the future I am planning to go even more high on this one. We all are familiar with Invesco QQQ fund. However, new fund from Invesco is even more lucrative. It is of course QQQM ETF. They both track Nasdaq 100 index, hold around 100 companies and nearly identical performance. Dividend yield of QQQM is 0.70%, where QQQ is 0.65%. Biggest difference between these two ETFs are expense ratio. QQQM has an expense ratio of 0.15% compared to QQQ expense ratio of 0.20%. Obviously, if you are opting for lowest fees possible, QQQM is a better option. QQQM is going crazy the last year with appreciation of almost 52% and has 10-year average yearly returns of almost 18%. Top holdings of this ETF are Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Broadcom, Meta, Nvidia, Tesla, Google. This ETF is special from the last three because those were purely technology ETFs. However, investing in QQQM, you are exposing yourself to a lot of growth companies that are not necessarily tech companies. It is obviously holding a lot of technology companies still, but it holds companies in other sectors as well. This obviously makes QQQM less risky and more diversified than the last three we were talking about. QQQM invests in information technology, communication services, consumer discretionary, consumer staples, and healthcare. QQQM is one of my largest holdings in my portfolio and make almost 30% of my entire portfolio. Next ETF we are going to talk about is quite interesting compared to the last four. To quote Warren Buffett, one of the best investors in the world, his biggest view revolves around competitive advantage which is sustainable. During his lifetime, he always picked companies that had such big competitive advantage comparing to other companies that it is almost impossible for other company to compete. It obviously works since he was such a successful investor with this strategy alone. Company that has huge competitive advantage is like 10 out of 10 women with wife material character. It is obviously very rare, and such women will have no problem finding a man since literally every single man would want her as their wife. This is exceptional woman. Such companies with competitive advantage are as exceptional. ETF we are talking about is MOAT, Morningstar Wide MOAT ETF. This ETF focuses on US companies Morningstar believes possess sustainable competitive advantages, or MOATs. It has highest expense ratio of 0.46%. I really like this ETF since it tries to promote ethical business practices. Companies MOAT invests in has to have low ESG risk, low controversy score, and carbon risk, and lastly, not single company in this ETF can be involved in tobacco, controversial weapons, civilian firearms, and thermal coal. Top holdings are way different than the last ones we talked about. MOAT ETF invests in Intercontinental Exchange, Allegiant PLC, Autodesk, Alphabet, Alphabet, Teradine, CME Group, Ecolab, and more. Since its inception, it appreciated almost 13% each year on average. Sectors of MOAT ETF are balanced really good with information technology, financials, healthcare, industrials, and consumer staples. Very interesting ETF to add to your research list if you are interested with very low fund overlap with S&P 500 and want to diversify even more. The next one we are going to talk about is SPYD. It is everything good from S&P 500 but with high dividend yield. It is SPDR portfolio S&P 500 high dividend ETF. It has very low expense ratio of 0.07%. This ETF tracks an index that is designed to measure the performance of the top 80 high dividend yielding companies within the S&P 500 index. SPYD has a super high dividend yield of 4.58%. This is not even comparable to S&P 500 VOO dividend yield of 1.48%. This fund had around 7.4% yearly appreciation from its inception date. It is not as high as others, but with that dividend paid you consistently, it really adds up. Top holdings in this are quite different from the others as well, so it makes a good ETF to diversify. SPYD invests in Seagate Technology Holdings, NRG Energy, Amgen, Philips, KeyCorp, Fifth Third Bancorp, Packaging Corp of America, Verizon, and more. SPYD invests in multiple sectors which are well balanced with financials, real estate, utilities, healthcare, energy, materials, consumer staples, industrials. It is definitely worth adding to your research list. Now, let's talk about last one, which is definitely one of my favorites in dividend field. Being honest, S&P 500 is still my favorite and is here to stay, but second most favorite is this ETF. One of the biggest advantage of this ETF is that when you buy it you get not only the price appreciation working in your favor in the long term, but also that dividend will continue to grow. It has a big history of growing its dividend every year, so now you're buying a smaller dividend which will be worth way more in the future. It is one of the best two-way profit ETF. It is of course SCHD ETF. If you are interested in learning more about this fantastic and arguably one of the best ETFs to own, check out few videos I made about this ETF and learn more. They will be linked in the description and at the end of this video. If you found any value in this video, like and subscribe. I would like to see a discussion about your favorite ETFs down below as well. Until next time.